Short story 141, The Disappearing Delivery. The rhythmic click-clack of Mrs. Peabody's knitting needles filled the cosy living room. Outside, a gentle rain pattered against the windowpanes, creating a soothing backdrop to her afternoon routine. Suddenly, a loud, insistent rap on the door shattered the peaceful ambience. Frowning, Mrs. Peabody put down her knitting and hobbled towards the door. Peeking through the peephole, she saw a young delivery woman, drenched from head to toe, holding a large cardboard box. Relief washed over Mrs. Peabody. It was finally here, her long-awaited antique telescope. With a trembling hand, she unlocked the door. The delivery woman, a cheery young woman named Sarah, practically shoved the box inside. "Sorry about the weather, ma'am. Nearly turned into a mermaid on the way here," she exclaimed, wiping rain from her face. "No worries, dear. Come in for a hot cup of tea while I sign," Mrs. Peabody replied, ushering Sarah into the warm room. Sarah gracefully accepted the offer, her teeth chattering slightly. After a quick signature and a steaming mug of tea, Sarah was on her way, leaving Mrs. Peabody alone with the intriguing box. Excitement bubbled within her as she tore through the packaging tape. Inside, nestled in thick foam padding, lay a beautiful, ornately engraved telescope. It was even more magnificent than in the online photographs. However, excitement quickly turned to confusion. As Mrs. Peabody gingerly lifted the telescope, a glint of metal caught her eye. Tucked beneath the padding, partially hidden, was a small leather-bound notebook. It wasn't part of the telescope order, and a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Curiosity, however, overpowered her initial apprehension. She carefully opened the notebook. The faded ink revealed meticulous handwriting, filled with detailed astronomical observations and cryptic notes about celestial alignments. One particular entry caught her attention. It spoke of a rare lunar phenomenon, visible only through a specific type of telescope, a description that matched the one Mrs. Peabody had just received. The date mentioned was just a few days away. A shiver ran down Mrs. Peabody's spine. This notebook clearly didn't belong to her. Who sent it, and why? Was it a mistake, or something more sinister? Driven by a sense of adventure and a healthy dose of curiosity, Mrs. Peabody decided to investigate. The next day she ventured out, the telescope box tucked discreetly under her arm and the notebook hidden in her handbag. Her first stop was the antique shop where she had purchased the telescope. The owner, a kind but slightly absent-minded gentleman named Mr. Finch, greeted her warmly, but when she mentioned the notebook, his face paled. "Mrs. Peabody," he stammered, "that shouldn't have been included. It belonged to the previous owner, a stargazer who vanished under mysterious circumstances years ago." Intrigue turned to concern. A missing owner? A mysterious notebook? The telescope suddenly felt less like a curious purchase and more like a key to an unsolved puzzle. With Mr. Finch's cautious blessing, Mrs. Peabody took it upon herself to decipher the notebook's secrets. Days turned into weeks as she delved into the world of astronomy, deciphering the cryptic language of constellations and lunar alignments. Slowly, a picture began to form. The notebook detailed a hidden location, a secluded clearing in a nearby forest, where the specific lunar phenomenon would be perfectly observable. Mrs. Peabody knew then what she had to do. The night of the alignment arrived, crisp and clear. Armed with her newfound knowledge, the telescope, and a healthy dose of courage, Mrs. Peabody ventured into the unfamiliar darkness of the forest. Guided by the notebook's instructions, she finally stumbled upon the clearing. And there it was, a majestic sight unlike anything she had ever witnessed. The moon, adorned with a perfect ring of light, hung low in the sky. As she gazed in awe, a faint metallic glint caught her eye. Partially buried beneath the roots of an ancient tree was a small metal box. Her heart pounding, Mrs. Peabody unearthed the box. Inside, nestled in velvet lining, lay a collection of old photographs, images of a smiling man gazing at the stars through a telescope identical to hers. It was the missing owner, the stargazer. Mrs. Peabody knew with a certainty that defied logic that somewhere within the forest the missing man held the answers to his own disappearance. With renewed determination she vowed to unravel the final piece of the mystery and find the man who loved the stars just as much as she did. The following nights were a blur of research and exploration. Mrs. Peabody devoured books on local history and folklore, searching for any mention of the missing stargazer or the clearing described in the notebook. She enlisted Mr. Finch's help, his knowledge of the area proving invaluable. One afternoon, a faded newspaper clipping tucked within an old town directory caught their eye. The headline screamed, "Stargazer disappears! Search parties found nothing." The article detailed the disappearance of a local astronomer, Thomas Thorne, years ago. Armed with this new information, Mrs. Peabody and Mr. Finch returned to the clearing, their eyes scanning the landscape with renewed purpose. This time Mrs. Peabody noticed a faint depression in the earth, partially obscured by fallen leaves. Carefully they began to clear the debris. Beneath the surface, a rusted metal hatch creaked open, revealing a narrow passage leading downwards. A wave of apprehension washed over them, but the mystery was too close to abandon now. With a deep breath, Mrs. Peabody, clutching a flashlight, descended into the darkness, Mr. Finch following closely behind. The passage led to a small dusty chamber. In the dim light, Mrs. Peabody spotted a makeshift desk covered with astronomical charts and diagrams. A half-written note lay abandoned, details blurring with age. But at the very bottom, a single sentence stood out. "Hidden chamber. Alignment clue." Suddenly a rumbling sound echoed through the chamber, followed by a faint scraping noise. Panic seized Mrs. Peabody. Was the chamber collapsing? As the dust settled, the source of the noise became clear. A hidden doorway had revealed itself, seemingly activated by some unknown mechanism triggered by the moonlight filtering through the hatch above. With trembling hands, Mrs. Peabody pushed open the doorway. Inside, a small makeshift observatory greeted them. A powerful telescope dominated the room, pointing towards a mirrored panel set into the ceiling. It was then Mrs. Peabody realized this wasn't just an observatory, it was a hidden vantage point, designed to capture a specific celestial phenomenon through the reflected moonlight. As they explored further, a worn leather satchel tucked behind a makeshift chair caught their eye. Inside they found personal items, a diary, a worn photograph of a young woman holding a telescope, and a series of detailed maps leading deep into the uncharted wilderness beyond the forest. The diary entries, penned by Thomas Thorne, detailed his fascination with the stars and his discovery of the hidden clearing. He documented his observations, including the strange lunar phenomenon and the hidden chamber he built beneath it. The final entry hinted at a journey beyond the forest, following a celestial map he had created based on his observations. Tears welled up in Mrs. Peabody's eyes. Thomas Thorne wasn't missing, he had chosen to disappear, driven by a relentless pursuit of astronomical knowledge. And the maps, they were a clue, a potential path to reunite him with his loved ones if they were still searching. The decision was clear. Mrs. Peabody, the unassuming old lady with a love for knitting and a newfound passion for astronomy, knew what she had to do. Packing the maps, the diary, and a healthy dose of determination, she set off on a new adventure, guided by the stars and the legacy of a missing stargazer. The journey beyond the forest was arduous. untamed wilderness replaced the familiar paths of Mrs. Peabody's life. Days blurred into weeks as she navigated dense foliage, crossed gushing streams, and camped under the canopy of twinkling stars. The maps, faded and cryptic, offered only a whisper of a path. But Mrs. Peabody persevered. Fueled by a growing sense of purpose, she consulted the notebook and diary entries every night, finding solace in Thomas Thorne's meticulous observations and a strange sense of kinship with the missing man. One particularly grueling climb led her to a breathtaking vista. Below, nestled amongst a valley bathed in morning mist, lay a small village unlike any she had ever seen. Stone houses with thatched roofs huddled together, smoke curling from their chimneys. In the centre of the village, a large observatory dome gleamed in the sunlight. Hope surged through Mrs. Peabody. Could this be it? Had she finally found Thomas Thorne? With renewed energy, she descended the slope, her arrival causing a stir amongst the villagers. They emerged, a curious mix of faces, their language unfamiliar, but their smiles warm and welcoming. Using a combination of gestures and basic astronomy knowledge gleaned from her time with the notebook, Mrs. Peabody managed to communicate her purpose. The villagers' faces lit up with recognition. They spoke of Thomas Thorne, a respected member of their community, a man who had arrived years ago with a wealth of knowledge about the stars. He had become their teacher, helping them understand the language of the cosmos. Relief washed over Mrs. Peabody. Tears welled up in her eyes as she learned that Thomas Thorne was alive and well, a revered member of this hidden village. But where was he now? The village elder, a wizened woman with eyes twinkling like distant stars, explained. Thomas Thorne, ever the explorer, had recently embarked on a new expedition, following a celestial map he had created, venturing deep into the unknown reaches of the wilderness. A bittersweet pang hit Mrs. Peabody. She had come so close. Yet the story wasn't quite over. She presented the diary, the photographs, and the map she had brought. The villagers gasped, their faces filled with a mix of joy and worry. The elder, speaking slowly, explained that Thomas Thorne did leave messages for his loved ones, cryptic messages hidden within the constellations themselves. Perhaps, she suggested, with Mrs. Peabody's newfound knowledge and their own understanding of the stars, they could decipher the messages and find Thomas Thorne themselves. Thus began a new chapter in Mrs. Peabody's extraordinary adventure. She spent weeks, perhaps months, immersed in the village life, learning their language and deciphering the cryptic astronomical messages left behind by Thomas Thorne. Under the guidance of the village elders, and with the stars as their compass, Mrs. Peabody and a group of villagers embarked on a new quest. They ventured beyond the familiar boundaries of the valley, following a trail of celestial clues left behind by the missing stargazer. The story doesn't end here. Whether they find Thomas Thorne remains to be seen, but one thing is certain. Mrs. Peabody, the unassuming old lady with a love for knitting, has become an unlikely adventurer, her life forever intertwined with the stars and the legacy of a missing astronomer. The journey with the villagers was unlike anything Mrs. Peabody had ever experienced. Gone were the quiet afternoons spent knitting by the window. Now she navigated treacherous mountain passes, deciphered ancient symbols carved into weathered rocks, and learned the language of the stars under the tutelage of the village elder, Amara. Amara, with her weathered face etched with wisdom lines and eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the cosmos, became a trusted friend and guide. Together they pored over Thomas Thorne's cryptic messages, each constellation a brushstroke in a celestial story. One starlit night, huddled around a crackling fire, Amara pointed to a cluster of stars unseen by Mrs. Peabody before. "This," she declared, tracing the pattern with a gnarled finger, "is the hunter's arrow. It points the way to the Whispering Canyons, a place whispered of in legends, said to hold secrets both beautiful and perilous. A shiver ran down Mrs. Peabody's spine. The Whispering Canyons. Could this be where Miss Thomas Thorne had vanished? The name evoked a sense of foreboding, yet the thought of finally finding him fueled her determination. The trek to the canyons was fraught with danger. The air grew thin and harsh, the ground treacherous. One misstep could mean a plunge into the swirling mists that perpetually shrouded the canyon's depths. Finally they reached the canyon rim. Below, a swirling vortex of mist churned, emitting a haunting, ethereal whisper that sent shivers down their spines. Legends spoke of the whispers being the voices of lost souls, forever trapped within the canyon's embrace. Fear threatened to consume Mrs. Peabody, but the image of Thomas Thorne, his face etched with the joy of discovery, spurred her on. Amara, sensing her fear, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The whispers are a test," she said, her voice low and steady. "They test the strength of your resolve. If your heart is true, they will guide you, not harm you." Taking a deep breath, Mrs. Peabody stepped forward. The whispers intensified, swirling around her, threatening to pull her into the abyss. But she held firm, her mind focused on Thomas Thorne. Suddenly a pattern emerged within the whispers, a melody of sorts, faint but unmistakable. It was the melody she recognized, the secret lullaby from the old scroll, the one passed down through generations in her own family. Tears welled up in her eyes. Could this be a sign, a message from Thomas himself? Following the melody's lead, Mrs. Peabody navigated the treacherous path down the canyon wall. The whispers grew louder, morphing from a chilling symphony of despair into a gentle, beckoning song. Finally she emerged into a hidden valley, bathed in ethereal glow. Lush vegetation carpeted the valley floor, and a magnificent waterfall cascaded down a smooth rock face. In the centre stood a lone observatory, its dome gleaming in the otherworldly light. And there, standing before the telescope, his back turned, was a figure silhouetted against the luminous waterfall. "Thomas Thorne?" Mrs. Peabody called out, her voice hoarse with emotion. The figure turned, revealing a weathered face, creased with surprise, and then, slowly, a smile of pure joy. It was him, the missing stargazer, alive and well. The reunion was filled with tears, laughter, and 1,000 questions. Thomas Thorne explained how he had followed his celestial map, leading him to this hidden paradise. He had built the observatory and continued his astronomical studies, forever yearning for the stars and the world he had left behind. The villagers, overjoyed to see their friend reunited with his past, offered him a choice: stay with them in the peaceful valley or return with Mrs. Peabody to the world he once knew. The decision wasn't easy. Thomas looked at Mrs. Peabody, a silent conversation passing between them. He had found a new home, a community that cherished his knowledge, but a part of him still yearned for the familiar. In the end, Thomas decided to return, not alone. He would share his knowledge with the villagers, bridge the gap between their worlds, and perhaps, someday, return to the hidden valley, a place that would ever hold a special place in his heart. As Mrs. Peabody stood on the cusp of the familiar world, a bittersweet pang filled her heart. Her life had taken an extraordinary turn, filled with adventure and discovery. But most importantly, she had found an unlikely friend, a kindred spirit who, like her, looked up at the stars and saw not just twinkling lights, but a universe of endless possibilities. The return journey was a triumphant one. News of Mrs. Peabody's daring adventure and the discovery of the hidden village spread like wildfire. Thomas Thorne became a local hero, not just for his astronomical knowledge, but for the bridge he helped build between his two worlds. Back in her cosy living room, surrounded by familiar sights and sounds, Mrs. Peabody felt a pang of longing for the wild beauty of the hidden valley. But the experience had irrevocably changed her. Gone was the unassuming knitter. In her place stood a woman brimming with stories and a newfound passion for the cosmos. One clear night, gazing out of her window at the star-dusted canvas, Mrs. Peabody felt a familiar tug on her heartstrings. She retrieved the telescope, the one that had started it all, and the well-worn notebook. Side by side with Thomas, who now resided in a small observatory built on the outskirts of town, they began their next adventure, sharing their knowledge with anyone who looked up at the night sky with wonder. They held stargazing sessions, teaching constellations and the stories woven into the stars. Mrs. Peabody, with her gentle demeanour and surprisingly vast astronomical knowledge, became a beloved figure. Children, their faces alight with curiosity, flocked to her sessions, captivated by tales of hidden valleys and brave explorers. Thomas, with his years of experience and quiet wisdom, inspired a new generation of stargazers, teaching them not just the science of the stars, but the sense of awe and wonder they evoked. Their journey had come full circle. The missing delivery, the cryptic notebook, the whispers in the canyon. It had all led them to a place far beyond their wildest imaginations. They had found not just a hidden valley, but a hidden part of themselves, a shared love for the universe that transcended age and circumstance. And as they continued to gaze at the stars side by side, a silent promise hung between them, a promise to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep inspiring others to look up, not just at the night sky, but at the limitless possibilities that lay beyond. Vocabulary notes. General. Intrigued, adjective, very interested and curious. Unease, noun, a feeling of worry or nervousness. Scrutinize, verb, examine something closely and critically. Celestial, adjective, related to the sky, stars, planets, and other objects in space. Abode, noun, a home or dwelling place. Unassuming, adjective, modest and not attracting attention. Tumultuous, adjective, noisy, chaotic, and violent. Ethereal, adjective, delicate, light, and beautiful in an otherworldly way. Yearning, noun, a strong feeling of longing or desire for something. Bittersweet, adjective, a mixture of pleasant and unpleasant feelings. Rhythmic click-clack, noun, phrase, a repeated regular clicking sound. Patched, verb, repaired a hole or tear with a piece of different material. Exquisitely, adverb, in a very beautiful and delicate way. Apprehension, noun, a feeling of worry or fear that something bad might happen. Scrutinize, verb, examine something closely and critically. Cryptic, adjective, mysterious and difficult to understand. Alignment, noun, the way that two or more things are arranged in a line. Delve, verb, explore something deeply and in detail. Meticulous, adjective, very careful and precise. Ephemeral, adjective, lasting for a very short time. Vanished, verb, disappeared completely and mysteriously. Cautious, adjective, careful to avoid danger or risk. Unravel, verb, solve a mystery or problem. Blur, noun, a period of time that is not clearly remembered. Scrutinize, verb, examine something closely and critically. Directory, noun, a book listing the names, addresses, and phone numbers of people or businesses. Flickered, verb, moved or shone unsteadily. Rumbling, adjective, making a deep continuous sound. Hatch, noun, a hinged opening or cover in a floor, roof or wall. Untamed, adjective, not controlled or civilized. Gushing, adjective, flowing out suddenly and in large amounts. Celestial map, noun, phrase, a map showing the positions of stars and planets. Untamed, adjective, not controlled or civilized. Worn, adjective, damaged or made less strong by use or age. Expedition, noun, a journey with a particular purpose, especially to explore an unknown area. Treacherous, adjective, dangerous and likely to cause harm. Whirlwind, noun, a violent swirling mass of wind. Shrouded, verb, covered or hidden completely. Eerie, adjective, strange and frightening in a way that cannot be explained. Melodious, adjective, pleasantly musical. Triumphant, adjective, successful and victorious. Bridge, noun, a connection between two things. Yearning, noun, a strong feeling of longing or desire for something. Constellations, noun, a group of stars that form a recognizable pattern in the sky. Captivated, verb, completely fascinated and interested. Limitless, adjective, having no limit or end. Story written by Google Bard AI. Image created by desgo.com AI. Please check out my new blog at www.steveuk.blog. Thank you.